To introduce myself, I'm Joaquin Viquez. I work for the German cooperation agency GIZ in the offices in San Jose, Costa Rica. And well, Elvira has joined. Elvira Segura from the Dominican Republic. It's the Institute for Potable Water and Sewage Systems. Okay, thank you. So, as I was saying, before starting, it is very important to highlight that this session is going to be recorded. So, by policies of the Cooperation Agency, if you do not want to be recorded, I will ask you to please leave the session. Both the recording as well as the presentations will be posted on the website that I'm going to share with you if you have not seen it. So if you have not gone into the website, let me try to show you here. Yes, exactly here. In the website of the Career Plus Academy, you can get into the session called Resources, and right there you're going to be able to see the materials from all the webinars that have taken place so far. For example, wetlands as a nature-based solution, which was the very first one. If you click the plus sign, you can see slides in English and Spanish, and also the recordings of the talks, just in case you missed it, both in Spanish and in English. And we're going to continue posting these things up throughout the sessions we will have. So that is for you to also be able to share it with your colleagues. Okay, so I was saying, let's see, perfect, got my screen up there. Okay, so I'm going to start recording. Okay, so with this, I would also like to ask all the participants to keep the microphones in mute to save bandwidth and internet, also your cameras off, as well as your microphones, as I've just said, while we enjoy the seminar. As I was saying, this webinar is an initiative that we started a couple of months ago that we call the Crew Plus Academy. It is a series of capacity building sessions at a virtual in a virtual format because of the pandemic. We hope that the Crew Plus project can bring this training to those countries where we have actions and that they could eventually be face to face so that we can meet each other. All training goes around the topic of the Crew Plus, which is water and sanitation, water resources, water and sanitation in the Great Caribbean region. So without further ado, I would briefly like to introduce Gonzalo, who is our first speaker for the morning. Gonzalo was born in Mexico. He is a biologist by training. He has been trained at UNAM. He has a master's in environmental management from New York, and then since 1992 he has worked in professional efforts in the environmental conservation and sustainable use of resources in the area of Quintana Roo in Mexico, with the organization that is called Amigos de Sian Ka Friends. In the newsletters we have sent, we always put the links to the website for you to be able to take a look at them. And perhaps Gonzalo can tell us a little bit more about the organization. I would like to tell you that during this time, while Gonzalo has worked in the study of populational ecology of different species of animals, especially crocodiles, he has collaborated with many Mayan rural communities in the development of productive and environmental education projects. He has contributed to the establishment of several protected natural areas and designing the management programs, including the Flora and Fauna Protection Area, 2 reserves in Cozumel, and 1 at the Chichacanap Lake, adding up to almost 200,000 hectares of conservation. So it's really impressive. It is a long trajectory that Gonzalo has in the area. Perhaps just to highlight that, I don't know when this happened, Gonzalo, maybe you can tell us, but this group received the Whitney Award for the support and community work and also special recognition from the BW Awards on the Love of Planet. And on behalf of the collaborators, also the Escala Award of Sustainable Tourism. So since 2006, Gonzalo has been the executive director of Amigos de Sian Ka and a chair of the Council for the Basin in the Peninsula of Yucatan. So without further ado, let me go to the slides here. Well, I'm sorry I didn't put the pictures here, but we have here Gonzalo, and let me introduce, I will introduce Osvaldo when I confirm that he has been able to get into the session. So without further ado, I would like to now give the floor to Gonzalo for him to tell us a little bit about the experience and use of eco-techniques for water and sanitation in the area of Quintana Roo. So I'm turning off my camera, and the floor is all yours, Gonzalo. Thank you very much, Joaquin. I'm sorry, how much time do I have? Could you remind me? Well, it's 10 past 9 here, so maybe 20, 25 minutes for the presentation. Perhaps a couple more minutes if for any reason Osvaldo doesn't get connected, and I will let you know. Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you, Crew Plus, for the opportunity of being with you today. I will share with you a little bit of the experience that we have developed here at Amigos de Sian Ka. We are a nonprofit organization in the Mexican Caribbean at the Yucatan Peninsula. And since 35 years ago, we have been doing our work. We focus on the environmental conservation, but also in sustainable development. We are an organization that believes that a country cannot be developed without preserving the natural resources. And a country that is not developed does not have the means to take care of the natural resources. So we work hand in hand to bring these two arms or branches together, which is development and environmental conservation. Let's move to the next slide. Amigos de Sian Ka works throughout the state of Quintana Roo, especially in the Mexican Caribbean. We started as the Biosphere Reserve of San Juan, that is the humanity patrimony we have here in Quintana Roo many years ago, but we have been expanding that throughout the years. We have worked in all this region, beautiful region of Mexico, but at the same time, with a lot of challenges. The main tourist challenge destination of Latin America in 2019, we got 20 million tourists. 2020, we would have received even more tourists if it wouldn't have been for the pandemic. The population has grown more than 1,000% in the last 40 something years. So it's a beautiful area, but with a lot of issues, a lot of problems. And one of the most important ones is water. Why? Not because we're lacking water. We have one of the big underground reservoirs in Mexico. We have a lot of water. However, this very quick growth, this growth of tourism and the population and the growth of the cities. Cancun has more than 1 million inhabitants, for example. 50 years ago, though, it was just a small village of about 100 inhabitants. So that has caused contamination of water at a great scale in a lot of the population centers. And that, as an organization, has made us focus a lot of our effort in water, because at the end, water, in addition to this very serious problem that I'm talking about, water is the factor that helps us integrate the efforts of sustainability for the conservation in the region. We have the jungles that are the ones that capture the water, that filter it and get it clean to the subsoil. So we have to take care of these underground systems that we have that are so important. We have some of the largest underground developments in the world. This underground water gets to the wetlands and the coast, which are, that's a beautiful place. Somebody's saying, where is that? Apparently somebody had the microphone open. Okay, there's some people having the microphones open, so please close the microphones. Okay, and well, this water that gets to these very extensive coastal wetlands would eventually also get to the Mesoamerican reef that we share with Honduras, Guatemala, and Belize. and it's the second largest in the world. And in this journey from the jungle to the reef, the water feeds or nourishes the population. It gives way to this great development that we have in Cancun in the Mayan Riviera, and more than the 2 million people living in Quintana Roo. Well, we have more than 10 million in the whole peninsula of Yucatan. So for us, maintaining that link between the ecosystems and the society and development is very important. And that is why we're developing this very special effort in terms of water. And that is why we are collaborating with GIZ, with the Inter-American Development Bank, in implementing the project here in Mexico with the Water Convention, with the Water Institute. And in doing this work of conserving the water, preserving the water, returning clean water into the nature, we take it clean from the nature, so we have to return it clean to nature. We work at several levels. We work with the treatment plants of the big hotels of the region. We work at the level of the treatment plants, at the urban level, at the public level, and also at the level of the rural communities. And a few years ago, we opened a whole area of work in this to be able to help the communities, many of them marginal communities, very remote communities, Mayan communities especially, to help them have access to clean water first, easy to access, and having a water management system in their houses, in their towns, so that they could manage wastewater and reduce the contamination of these water sources. And this is how we started a project with the support of the Enrique Foundation to install what we call eco-techniques for water management in these communities. We started in 12 communities, and we have learned a lot in that work we did with those communities. And those are actions and lessons that I'm going to share with you. And now we're about to begin with the Secretary for Social Development in the state of Quintana Roo, with the support of the Rarante Association and Crew Plus. We're going to start a new stage to get into higher levels in the system of alternative methods for water management. Next slide, please. Right here, we see the map of Quintana Roo. In the east of the Yucatan Peninsula, in the north, we have Cancun, then we have the Cozumel Island, and right here, we have the border with Belize, the state of Campeche, state of Yucatan, and we see here the municipalities where we have focused our efforts in downtown Quintana Roo, where we are even working in this area for this to be a sustainable tourist destination. And we are working in these 3 municipalities in communities with a high level of marginalization, high levels of poverty. Maybe they do not have water utilities in the area, and that they have the interest of participating. That is a fundamental part, that they really have the will, that they really participate in the community to explore something new, because many times we just bring proposals that are kind of strange to their culture. So we need to be open enough as to accept those new alternatives. Right here, we see a chart. We have the fortune of having a lot of rain. We are not like the rainiest region in Mexico, but we have enough rain, especially from May to November. We have enough rainfall, so this allows us to focus our efforts in capturing rainwater, harvesting rainwater, and base water management on rainwater. What is captured between May and November would also be useful for the driest months, going from December to April. And something important here this is a karstic area. The Yucatan Peninsula is a calcareous platform, except in the border with Belize and some other areas in Yucatan where we do not have superficial rivers in the region. I would say 99% of the water that supplies the population is taken from the subsoil. It's very calcareous water. It is not like very good quality, perhaps because of that region. However, we all drink the water from that source. The advantage of rainwater is that it is not calcareous. It has a better quality. And we have to rescue a little bit the habit that we had here at the Yucatan Peninsula of extracting or consuming rainwater, which was a habit that was lost with this culture of piping and pumping water, bringing it to some tanks. So we had lost that culture of harvesting rainwater in the peninsula. Next slide, please. Okay, so in these 12 communities that I talked to you about, we built several techniques with the proposal from the Mexican Institute of Water Technology that developed and implements these technologies in a lot of communities throughout Mexico. We have built some tanks precisely to capture water rain, either from the roofs that already exist, like this school, or some tin roofs that are expressly built to capture rainwater. So it's between 20 and 50 cubic meters, the capacity of these tanks. Next slide, please. These are the water harvesting systems that I was talking to you about. A lot of the houses in the region still have some palm tree roofing, so it is more efficient to build some tin roof that helps us capture the water. Next slide. We have also built, with the help of the community, and this is very important because people really get engaged in decision making, in construction, saying who's going to participate in the project and so on, from the very conception of the project in each of the sites. So we focused on the first phase of the project in what we call the dry latrines, and that has had pros and cons that I would talk to you about. And also for laundry, for washing the clothing, we have installed artificial tanks to clean those or wetlands to clean the water and put them back into the tanks. Okay, next slide. Also, especially in the schools, we have used wetlands and grease traps to treat, especially at the school level, so that the water that is used can help later irrigate, like the orchards in the communities. Next slide. In some houses, but especially in schools, they have installed those orchards. They call them canche in Mayan. These are built in high in an elevation to protect them from the animals, and they use the water that is generated from the wetlands that I talked to you about before. Next slide, please. In some cases where the geography or the topography of the plot does not allow us to use gravity, we are in quite a flat area. So yes, sometimes there is some kind of slope, but not in all places. So we have the possibility of putting the tank with an adequate elevation so that we can have the water flowing by gravity. But if this is not possible, we have also installed pumps with the photo cells to be able to bring the water to the house to do laundry or for whatever use people want to give it. Next slide. It is very important to highlight that originally the project was also contemplating some pumps to facilitate the pumping of water with bicycles, but then people started to use their bicycles to go to their plantations, to their parcels, and go to work, not so much to pump the water. So we started to use the solar panels because of that. And well, we also set up slow flow filters to clean the water, to purify the water in a better way. They're quite rustic. The image may not generate a lot of trust to people, and this is something we are working on. However, the quality of the water they generate is quite good. Next slide, please. Okay, so during this first phase of the project that finished a couple of years ago, it took us 3 years to build 347 tanks benefiting 1,042 people. And here I share with you some of the percentages of acceptance for these techniques in the region. Some of them have been very popular, some others have not been so popular. The artificial wetlands have been used in 100%. Those that were installed were 100% in use. We still have to do some work in terms of social management to generate structures that will help develop some maintenance patterns for these facilities. Just a second, allow me to get some water here. And I was also, I was going to say that we also did some rehabilitation in sanitation facilities that already existed. However, these are very common, so I think that they're not so useful because these rural communities require more maintenance. However, people see that the technologies, the ancient technologies they had, like the septic tanks, could also be useful. The roofing for the capturing of water rain, they're used 100%, as well as a pumping system with the solar panels. They use 100%. Next slide, please. And then we see lower percentages here in terms of the use of some of these technologies. For example, 75% use the tanks, but 25% decided to not use them again. These are the tanks from the Water Institute, and they're made of block and cement. And apparently, the quality of the block in some of the areas was not so good, and there were some cracks and damages in the structures, and that will force us to restore all this and see how we can transform those technologies towards the future. In the cases where the rainwater systems were abandoned was perhaps because there may have been some damages or there was a need for maintenance. And at that moment, the community didn't have the capacity to make those repairs. Perhaps a pipe that was broken or filter or O-ring that had been damaged. So there was no way in the community to repair them. So that is why the percentage of use in these systems had decreased in many of the cases. The biofilters, people consider that they generate humidity and mosquitoes. The dry latrines, they have not had such a good impact. It is important to mention here that a lot of the people in the communities in which we are working, they didn't even know about latrine. Many of them were people that just go out to the jungle and do their physiological needs. So first, it was like a cultural shock having a latrine and being a dry latrine, having to clean, having to extract the organic matter is not generating a very good acceptance. The orchards, they didn't generate a lot of interest in a given moment. The pumps operated with bicycles. It didn't work. The bicycles were used 100%, but not to do the pumping, just for transportation. And well, this is how we see in each of the cases the situations that we have found. Next slide, please. Okay, so we see what are the techniques that have been used in each community. In some cases, we see that there's been a low percentage of use. Next slide, please. And in other cases, we can see that the percentage of use is higher. Next slide. Okay, so from that very first phase of the project, it was, I would say, like an experimental phase. These techniques were implemented in this region for the first time. So from there, we realized that the biofilters do not respond to the customs and needs of the community. There was no real interest in the biofilters. The compost devices, they have not been very useful. The compost tanks, we link that together with the family orchards and the irrigation using the wastewater generated from the systems that we have implemented. But very honestly, people prefer to just give the remaining food to the animals and not put them into a compost. So composting is not really something that interests the inhabitants. Next slide. A lot of the tanks do not require the pumping system. Many of them did, and I already told you about what happened with the bicycles. So this is a topic we have to work on. We are not going to, or we are going to install the tanks, trying to find the greatest use, and hopefully trying to use gravity for the flow of water. Next slide. Something that happened to us, in spite of the fact that we try to coordinate ourselves a little bit more with the entities that install water systems in the communities, the communities selected did not have a potable water system at the beginning of the project. During the installation of the technologies, or after the installation of the technologies, the government came to put up their own water systems. So that generated competition between the systems. Some people preferred to use the systems that we had installed with them. Others have preferred to use the government systems. And a lot of the technologies that we have installed have not been used so much, in spite of the fact that we had coordinated with the authorities, but sometimes there are institutional or political objectives that are really imposed or prevail over the negotiations that are made in this field, in this topic. However, the technology that we have installed in the community schools, almost all of them have been broadly used. So in schools, this has been more useful than in homes in many other cases. Next slide, please. And in spite of the fact that some of the tanks were not used because of lack of maintenance, this is something that we're trying to tackle right now. We're trying to offer the maintenance, but the agendas or the people are satisfied with this because they think that water has better quality. It does not produce so much sediment. They don't have to walk to carry the water. Water is cleaner. So that is very important. We have to kind of see in the future how we find better ways of building the tanks. The cement tanks were thought like that in order for them to last longer, but we will have to evaluate the quality of the materials that are used for the construction. Next slide. And well, we have been finding that in a lot of these communities, there is a lack of knowledge about the issue of water and the problem that contamination represents for their health and for the health of the environment. And as I was telling you, there is a lack of technical capacity in these communities for the repair and maintenance of the tanks. Next slide, please. Something that was very important in the project was the participation or engagement of the professors in all these communities. They have small rural schools, very small, where there is one or two teachers, and they have to be 3 4 days a week. Sometimes they live in the same place, and they have all been key for the adoption of these technologies in the schools and to promote the use of these technologies among the inhabitants in the different communities. So we're really grateful with the support that we have received from the teachers in these rural areas. Next slide. The slow flow filter that INTA proposed requires zeolite, which is a material that does not exist in the region. It has to be brought in from the center of Mexico. And when I talk about the center of Mexico, I'm talking about perhaps 24 hours driving. So it is expensive, it is difficult, it is not something useful for the people in the community. The artificial wetlands have been easy to use and they require little maintenance. While there is water, plants will grow on their own. So those artificial wetlands close to the laundry areas have been very useful. Next slide, please. With regards to these laundry places, it is important to mention that here at the Yucatan Peninsula, there is some uh, devices that are kind of long to wash the hammocks, because everybody in the rural communities, they all have hammocks, and many of them sleeping hammocks actually. And the package from INTA had small tanks, square tanks, which are very common downtown Mexico City, and that also created an issue because it was very difficult to wash the hammocks. They could wash small pieces of clothing, but not the hammocks. So we have had to install some hybrid systems with two different tanks so that we can adjust to the situation that they live in, because they need these traditional tags in the area for the area. Okay, and to start wrapping, well, I just described to you many of the findings, and in thinking about the next phase of the project, where the idea is to get to many more communities with the support of the Foundation Rio Ronta in collaboration with the Social Secretariat in Quintana Roo. What we are doing is that we want this project for the installation of technologies to go a little bit farther than what we did in the first phase. We want not just to build the technologies together with the community, but also we want to generate the necessary mechanisms for these projects to have greater sustainability towards the future. The acceptance of these technologies should continue growing in the area. If I'm not wrong, the average we have right now is a little bit over 50, but I think that it could be much higher. And for this, we're making more detailed diagnosis in each of the communities, both in the ones we have worked on, as well as in the ones we're going to be working on in the future. This is a diagnosis that has been delayed because of the pandemic. But anyway, even in line, we are developing some activities with the community so that we can start gathering the information. And as soon as we can go back to the field, we can continue working on these things. We are going through a holistic process for evaluation and selection of technology packages based on the evaluation that I've just mentioned. So this is kind of based on what we had done in the past. A few weeks ago, we had a workshop to help the experts evaluate the technologies that we have used and evaluate many other technologies that we currently have in the market and see what technologies we're going to be adopting in the next phase of the project, taking advantage of the lessons learned in the past and using the knowledge of the experts in this subject matter. So maybe we can use technologies from the previous package or new technologies. We're going to be working a lot in capacity building in the communities, training the youth. The idea is for this project to also become a possibility of employment for young people with technical capacities to work on plumbing and other similar areas, and that they can support their communities and do the maintenance for these installations. These water management program that we have to develop around these technologies would also imply setting up some leadership in the community, maybe using organizational structures in the community, existing structures, to be able to generate some water governance schemes that will help people make informed decisions with regards to these technologies, and that would help the community improve the use of water towards the future. We want these technologies to be lasting, to be durable, as we saw with the concrete systems, but we also want them to be affordable, better quality, easy to maintain, easier than the ones that we have had in the past. And also another point is that they could be better inserted into the community landscape. I mean, that they are more landscape friendly. And this is all accompanied, and I'm sorry that that phrase is not over there, but there is an important program for environmental education. There is an important program for water quality monitoring. We are working, Crew Plus is helping us actually developing citizen monitoring systems for water, for people to be able to see both in the water that they consume as well as in the water that they generate and in the water from their wells or the cenotes. That is what we have here, how the quality of water is, how they work with these technologies is helping improve the quality of the water, and with the environmental education that they receive, they can reinforce and raise more awareness about the use of these technologies for their health and for the environment. And I think that this more integral scheme that we're trying to see towards the future, where we have, governance, education, monitoring, construction of the technologies, this would all lead us to having more accepted technologies and for people to have a better quality of water, a better service, and a better quality of life. Next slide, please. And well, with this, I finished my part. This project has been very important for us. It has helped us promote the sustainability of the communities. I was telling you that we are promoting Madagascar as a sustainable tourism destination, but it is nonsense talking about this if there are no sustainable communities. So we are working very intensively into this project. We have learned a lot, and I'm sure we're going to continue learning a lot. I really want to thank Crew Plus for supporting us in this new phase of the project, and I'm sure that it is going to yield great results in the 12 communities where we are already working, as well as the next ones we're going to be working on towards the future. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Gonzalo. Your experiences have been very valuable. Perhaps there was a comment from Victor, so maybe we can take advantage of these couple of minutes before we jump to the next presentation. Victor Chacon is asking about how you approach the communities, if you do it individually or in groups. And he's also talking about the importance of involving schools into the process, particularly for the adoption of the technologies. You mentioned a little bit of this, but Victor is asking if it has been an individual effort, a group effort, if there is any specific group you make accountable for it. So I don't know if you want to add something about this. Yes, sure. We work in each community with the community as a whole. I mean, each community independently, but in the community, we do group everybody. We work with all of them. We see who is interested in working on this program, who is not, who may have the capacity for construction, for example, they may support in the work, especially building the tanks and so on. And we reach agreements with them to be able to build the technologies, sometimes house by house. The majority of the people accept this, as well as in the different schools. And then each family would focus on their own systems, on their own house. Although in some cases, as I was saying, there are people that may know about some mason work, and they help us in these things. They get engaged. In the case of the schools, there is a little bit more community interaction. There is some parents that get organized to be able to support the construction of these technologies. To be very honest, we do not always find a lot of interest from the parents in terms of supporting their school. Sometimes they just think that the school is the one that has to provide the service to the community. But I think that in some cases we have found some openness in the community to get more involved. In other cases where this is not the case, it has been important to get the support from the teachers, because the children have bathrooms that are nicer than what they had before. And even they go through this educational process, because kids also learn about why these technologies are proposed. Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Gonzalo. Perhaps at the end of the session, if time allows, we can have like a small Q&A space. So thank you again, Gonzalo. I am going to introduce now Osvaldo. Osvaldo, can you hear us? Osvaldo, are you there? Yes, 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 I'm here. I'm sorry because I had my microphone off. But yes, I actually heard all the very interesting presentation from our brother in Mexico from Sian Ka. That is a very nice experience, right? And I think that at some time, well, it's a shame because of this pandemic, but it would be fantastic to have kind of an exchange, because there are many elements in common, and they've done this in a special way, different from us, perhaps, but in a given moment that will be similar. Thank you. No, yeah, thank you. Osvaldo, you actually touched a key point here, the Group Plus project, and perhaps I didn't mention this at the very beginning, but the reason why we talk a lot about water and sanitation in Indigenous communities is because apart from the Group Plus project focusing in water and sanitation, and we have a lot of influence in these peri-urban and rural projects, we have a lot of influence also in a lot of projects in Indigenous communities, specifically collaborating with Amigos de Sian Ka in Mexico, in Quintana Roo. We're also making some work in Mosquitia, and that is why we also invited Osvaldo, that I would introduce him in a second. And we're also supporting in Panama, in the area of Nucartin. So those are some areas where there is a lot of similarity. And as Osvaldo is saying, we hope that perhaps next year we can make an exchange of experiences face to face, perhaps to share this. But I want to introduce Osvaldo. He's graduated from the forest career of Nazi Forest in Honduras. He has a master's in community economic development in New Hampshire, United States. And as we talk these days, he said that he has devoted practically all his professional life to Indigenous communities, first practicing as a forestry person, and from 84 with MOPAWI, that he's going to tell us about this. He has worked in several topics like collective land ownership, the Mosquitia culture, the project that captured actually the interest from the World Bank, and this made the Secretariat of Education to adopt the project. And it has been implemented in 12 territorial councils or municipalities. And in addition, which I think is very interesting, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about this, he has worked on the export of local products from La Mosquitia and outwards. So it's, without further ado, Osvaldo, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Joaquin. We're waiting. No. Somebody had a microphone open. Okay, just as an introduction, I want to tell you that I have invited my colleague, sit down, a mosquito that also graduated from Snasi Forest, Iwatepeke, with in forestry engineering, and is going to be participating with me in this presentation at some time. But let's move to my first slide. Okay, MOPAWI is the abbreviation for these words in the Mosquita language, which is Mosquitia Pausa Aslica. And this is translated in Spanish or in English into the Association for the Development of the Mosquitia. I will be talking about the experience of MOPAWI in water and sanitation. And that is just a little part of what the work of MOPAWI has been in La Mosquitia, as Joaquin has mentioned. Because the main focus of our work has been on the rights of Indigenous people to collective land ownership. That is, the territory of La Mosquitia is like the last territory that has fortunately not been taken by the industries, by livestock, by the large forest enterprises, and by that type of institutions or corporations that at the end up destroying the natural resources, as has occurred in much of the country. They displaced the indigenous groups to the point of making them invisible. Here in Honduras, actually, we have a lot of experiences like the Lenca people, the Lenca community. Unfortunately, they got to the point where they completely lost their language. Nobody speaks that language or that dialect anymore. And there are some other communities, other groups like the Tolupan that only a little group in a remote area of a mountain speaks the Tolpan and maintain their Tolpan identity. And in the rest, we are trying to at least recover the identity. But it is very interesting that all this work at La Mosquitia has developed a great motivation with the indigenous groups throughout Honduras to be identified. You know, like they're raising their voices. The Tolupan is here, the Spech are here, the Lencas are here, although they may not speak their language. The Choltis are here, etc. And that, I think we didn't imagine that that was going to be the impact of our work on collective rights to land at La Mosquitia. That lasted from, let's say, 1987 to 2010. And from there, from 2012 to 2016, finally, the territories from La Mosquitia got their formal titles thanks to the work of a young leader, an agronomist engineer graduated from Catia in Mosquito, that at that moment was the chair of the MASTA, the Indigenous Mosquito Association, and that was also a great accomplishment how the mosquito organization that existed since more or less 1960 had never visualized the topic of these rights for collective ownership by the communities. But when MOPAWI promoted this topic, they immediately started to adopt it, and they took ownership at such a point that, as I said, in 2012, they started to work with the government to get their titles, and they made it. By 2016, they had titles for about 15,000 square kilometers of the territory. It was very important because at that moment, the people interested in livestock and forestry projects and so on started to try to invade a lot of the land. And unfortunately, that was mixed with drug traffic. But I'm just going to leave it there in terms of that point, because the topic right now is water and sanitation. And let me move to the next slide. This is the description of MOPAWI. First of all, it is a Christian organization that's devoted to promoting integral human development and the conservation of nature. From the very beginning, we have been identified with those two key points: integral human development and the conservation of nature. Next slide, please. Right here on the left side, we have an image, a photograph of the Caractasca Lake, one of the largest lakes at the Mosquitia. And at this moment, it has a governance program for coastal resources with funds from USAID and IUCN. Next slide. And we are going to see, for example, the wisdom of the Mosquito indigenous people or communities in the conservation of nature and sustainable livelihoods, and the ancestors' use of mangroves and wetlands. In this way, a lot of the ancient management or use done to these resources by the mosquito has been like just focusing on getting their survival out of the mangroves, fishing and many other things. Fishing, doing the fish, doing some other crustaceans and some reptiles also, such as iguana. Then has been a very important part of their diet. And that given the small populations in the community, this has been sustained. An iguana can lay up to 60 eggs and maintain the population. Also in the wetlands, they harvest turtles from freshwater, and they're small turtles that are locally called jicoteas or cushas in the Mosquita language. An iguana is called cacamo. Next slide, please. And we see that here. We have the iguana to the right, or cacana, and the turtle on the left, the kusua. Also, before I forget, I want to acknowledge that most of these pictures are a collaboration from our anthropologist colleague, Fernando Garcia, a person that has joined the group quite recently, but at that time he's been able to understand and he's been able to speak the Mosquita language. He is close to finishing his degree at the National University of Honduras. Next slide, please. An important part of the wetlands, of the rivers, is the means of transportation. Using canoes or duties, as we call them, to go from one community to the other one, because due to the characteristics of a lot of the wetlands, mainly in the coastal area, there are no roads. And some roads are used during the dry season, but with a little bit of rainfall, they get flooded. And rain is really abundant from April and all the way to November, sometimes even up to December, as the colleague from Sian Ka was also mentioned. Next slide, please. Okay, we have here an interesting example. On the rescue and reuse of anti-hurricane shelters, which is, or this is something that has to do with the construction of some shelter based on the excavation of kind of an underground tunnel. It's like a box, actually. It has 50 centimeters depth, perhaps a little bit more, and it has the capacity of sheltering or holding a family in there. And as you can see, this is just a drawing. We do not have a picture as such, but above this underground box, we have a palm roofing. This is something that can be manufactured very quickly. And then the roof may have an elevation of about 50 or 60 centimeters from the ground. So it is not so exposed to hard winds. And once the toughest part of the hurricane passes, then the family can come out and they can recover. And these shelters are made in highest lands, in highest places, which is what we called the plateaus, Tuilira, in Mosquito. And they can be built over there because, again, with the wetland, there is a risk that they may be flooded. Next slide, please. Okay. The source, the use of these water sources or water bodies. This is how you use navigation to move from one community to the next, using the canoes, using oars, using sails or cualtaras. That is a lake, so that you can navigate. You can also use sails. For a long time, there were no motors used, as we see more and more nowadays. To the right, we can see a dory, which is a small boat, like a canoe, precisely carrying the fruit of the palm that Joaquin mentioned in a given moment that was exported. It is still commercialized, but at a lower scale. In the left, we have a picture of an increasing number of non-traditional boats that are being used in the region. Elsa, are you there? Elsa, maybe you would like to make a comment? Yes, good morning and hello everyone. My name is Elsa Brown and I'm here with Osvaldo. Yes, Osvaldo, I'm right here. I'm listening to you. Thank you. I just wanted to mention, with regards to the previous slide where you were talking about this technique used to face the hurricanes when you were talking about these shelters. This technology that the use was kind of in standby because we had not faced big hurricanes like the recent ones, like Iota and others. So I just wanted to mention that this technique can be reactivated to face these type of hurricanes. We did it with these two hurricanes, Eta and Iota, and thanks to this, we didn't have any fatality in the territory where the assistance, both from the government as well as from other organizations, is scarce. There are no safe shelters. Well, this type of additional technology using just the local resources is a very good alternative to face natural events. So I just wanted to mention that very quickly. Thank you, Hesser. Okay, next slide, please. This here is an example. This is a picture from Heriberto Boden, who is a colleague in MOPAWI. An example on how these modern boats become more and more popular at La Mosquitia with the gasoline engines and so on. And that is something that is concerning. It worries us because we're talking about the consumption of non-local resources such as gasoline, and it implies contamination to the lake, to the rivers. And I know they shortened the time to move from one place to the other one. For example, crossing the Caratasca Lake from the main city, Puerto Lempira, to the coast. With one of these motors, you may take 1 hour, 1.5 hours. And before, with the cayucos, with the sails, it was a whole day journey using oars and using the sails. The sails that are called cualtara in Mosquito comes from two words, cuala, which is fabric, and cara, which is big. So it's a big piece of fabric, like a sheet. Next. Okay. One of, or some of the ancestral or ancient knowledge that is rooted, highly rooted, is the use of medicinal plants. Leaves, roots, tree cortex, fruit, or fruit juices. That has been very strong, a very strong custom, and it remains even after the development of the health centers by the government and the hospitals. That, by the way, there is only one hospital for 15,000 square kilometers. The people and the communities prefer traditional medicine to such an extent that they ensured that they have found the medicine against COVID. And actually, it is strange that in the communities themselves, somebody would die because of this pandemic of COVID. Usually, the people that are more affected by COVID are perhaps the ones that do not use these medicinal plants, because these are people that have lived in the city for a long time, and maybe they've come back and they depend more on the pharmaceutical medicines from the hospital and from the health centers. But I think that at a given point, the same health system, the hospital system from the government, should make recognition of the medicinal plants, of the traditional knowledge of the communities, to also come closer, because so far it is perceived that some people are kind of afraid of going to a health center or to a hospital from the government, because people may think that by going there, they're going to get contaminated. They're not going to get any medicine, but they're going to get contaminated. And they're really afraid of it. So, on the other hand, we see here, well, that, yeah, this, I would say it's new. The communities are starting to cultivate vegetables as part of the tree system without the need of deforesting. And this is something important if we see that the idea of agriculture in general is to end up with a forest to produce food. Food production, as we always say, in MOPAWI, with the communities, we always say that we cannot ignore the production of food. It is basic, it is important. But it doesn't have to eliminate the ecosystems. It has to be done with agroforestry systems. And actually, we are applying what we call some crops in rows, that in the middle of some of the roads or trails, so they cultivate some vegetables. It's a great system. I don't know if you have any information about the Inga model, but it would be good for you to get into the website of the Inga Foundation. It's a British ecologist that started to develop this system over 10 years ago, and it's fabulous. From what I know, there is no other system that can be compared in the way he's doing this and the way he's trying to extend it. But apparently, and I don't understand why, at least the government of Honduras doesn't seem to be interested, doesn't seem to sympathize with this Inga Foundation system. Next slide, please. Okay, Osvaldo, I want to ask you to kind of start wrapping up. You have about 3-4 more minutes. Okay. All right. This is how the houses are in the communities. You can see the houses are elevated in poles. That is because of the flooding. When there are big floods, these yards that look very nice here, you may be surprised because they're going to be fully flooded. Next slide. Next slide. Sorry, could you go back one? So you want to make any comment here about how the construction of the houses looks there with the local materials for the walls and the roofs and the poles? Basically, I would only mention here that this is the type of house that is used in rural communities at La Mosquitia. They're fresh, cool. They're normally elevated 1 or 2 meters. They're not so high, but yes, they're over the ground because of the flooding that is so frequent in the communities. The roof's made from a palm that is called tique, and the walls are usually made from other type of wood, and other palm that lasts a lot, even more than normal wood, precious wood or pine wood. It's not, this is very lasting. So basically that, and we don't have the tags in the house. Next slide. Okay. Okay, right here, this is a well water system. Is there a brief comment on there, please? Elsa, we cannot listen to you. Oh, sorry, I had my microphone off. I was quickly mentioning that this is a type of pump that perhaps many of you have seen it. These are pumps that are widely used at the level of the rural communities, very adapted to the area, and they work in areas where the areas are not so prone to floods. Their operation is very good. Their material is also very resistant to the conditions of the zone. It's just that you have to substitute the ropes every 6 months approximately, but they're very well adapted and they're very well received by the local population. Actually, very useful for the population too. But as I said, it requires a little bit of maintenance. And normally, for them to be more lasting, it is recommended to uh, have good joints and everything so that this is more lasting. Next slide. This is another system. This is where we have the tanks. They're rotoplast with a capacity between 600 and 1,000 gallons of water. And they are connected to a roof. In this case, preferably a tin roof that would allow for a better collection of rainwater. Elsa, would you like to make a brief comment here about the experience you've had with the management of these tanks in churches as collective systems. Oh well, these systems are being installed mainly in different places that have public access, like schools or churches, but also because this allows to make, there has to be like a little group, committee to be in charge of this, because if it is given to just one person, we wouldn't be promoting the use by the whole community. So, and it's very important to also have a committee for maintenance. So if you give a good use to these tanks, they may last for many years. And as Osvaldo was saying, it is necessary to repair the roofing or construct a new one, because if it is an old roofing, it may be damaging for health because of the rust of the zinc. Next line. Elsa, please talk to us about the dry latrines. Elsa, we cannot hear you. Sorry again. I always forget about the microphone. I was mentioning that these compost dry latrines, if you see, they're compost latrines, but we call them twins, or it's two latrines. You can see two doors. They are designed for family use for by a determinate number of families, 1, 2, 3 families. They use for a 10-member family, maybe from 4 to 6 months. So the idea is that when one reaches its maximum capacity, people can move to use the other latrine and leave the other one kind of hibernating in quotes, so that all the matter decomposes. And well, unfortunately, we do not have a site picture here because there is a door in the back. There is a little door in the back from which you withdraw the material that has actually become uh, dirt or just organic fertilizer. So the idea is to also use this material for the production of food and agriculture. And basically, that's what it is about. We have this latrine. Once you empty the latrine, you can just change from one to another one. So this is a latrine that can be used for a year by a family of about 10 members. The latrine is not directly on the ground, but it is also elevated, considering also the flow level. It has to be in an area that is not so prone to flooding, or a high area close to the house or to other houses. Okay, so that has been a very well accepted technology in the community. Unfortunately, the Mosquita community do not like to use the latrines because culturally they have been using more the spaces where there is a lot of weed, and this is where they usually go. And it has been difficult. It has been difficult to make people use the latrines, but there is quite a bit of acceptance, as I've said, especially in those communities where there is a lot of wetlands. Yeah, I just wanted to add over there, Joaquin, very quickly, that the advantage that the communities or the people have accepted these latrines. Oh, I'm so sorry, he's cutting off. Okay, that's precisely okay. The way the advantage or having accepted this is precisely because they are kind of in an isolated place. And also the fact that they're not in the house, they're a little bit separated. They don't cause any contamination. But in any case, in this sanitation system with these dry latrines, and also with the water containers for rainwater, in all those cases, we are talking about initiatives that require a lot of support to be able to expand the use to the different communities. Because, well, right now we have covered just a few communities, and we're talking about 300 communities in the Mosquitia. Just to add here, why this is called solar, and it's because we usually install the latrine at a place where there are not many trees, so that the trees would not avoid the entry of the sunlight, because sun plays a key role. The sun rays plays a key role in the decomposition of organic matter. And something else that I also wanted to mention is that the families, there was also some skepticism among the local families in terms of using the decomposed matter, because they would say that it was coming from the human excretes, from the latrines. So the communities were not really using the material. But more recently, we have had some exercises, some kind of training and education processes, where even the family using the latrines have been able to produce in their housing space, in the backyards. They have produced some vegetables, and it has been demonstrated that there is value added for all this in terms of the production of food for the family. Next slide. This here is for hand washing. And this started when COVID started last year. So this is to have like a system for hand washing without contact with the containers, etc. Next slide. Okay, so with this, we finish 10:30 sharp. So thank you very much. Tinky Pali in Mosquito, and welcome again. Thank you very much, Osvaldo and Ilse. That was a very interesting presentation. I wanted to ask you, perhaps, in comparison to what Gonzalo also presented in the experience, we have talked a little bit about, well, maybe Harold, if you're there, you're part of the Panapana project, which is a project that is also taking place at the Mosquitia on the topic of the use of the dry latrines. So, Gonzalo, if you're still there, could you remind us again what was the experience with of the dry latrines in Quintana Roo? Yes, I'm still here. Well, the acceptance has not been very high. The fact of having to clean or taking the compost out, that is not like the most attractive thing in the world for them. And from the environmental point of view, it is a problem for us because we do not have a guarantee on how the organic matter is used once it is extracted. Some people may use it as fertilizer and so on, but some people just throw it to the water sources, and that is not the objective. The objective is to protect the environmental health. That is why it is so important to do environmental education and the work of governance that we want to do. And at this moment, we are checking what options of a bathroom we can offer. I think that most will face this type of issues, but we're looking at some of the alternatives with regards to the bathrooms to reduce the problems and increase acceptance by the people. So that is perhaps, I would say, the critical point of our project. Gonzalo, yes, go ahead. One of the keys to success in our project, as I was mentioning, is that the compost dry latrine is not discharged quickly. You leave it in the box, in the compost box, to decompose. And meanwhile, you're using another latrine, what we call the alternative latrine. And this initial latrine is discharged or emptied after some time when all that waste is almost fully decomposed. And depending on the design in the box and in the back, there is this door that Elsa was mentioning. And there is a clear, transparent sheet that allows for the capturing of the sun. So the idea is to have a good exposure with the sun so that decomposes the matter. And when the user family is discharging the latrine, there's no odor, there's no aspect that may related to excrete waste or anything like that. So that has solved a little bit like the initial fear, because of course the indigenous cultures, that's very strong, right? But this is something we have been able to overcome, as I'm telling you. Well, thank you very much. I would propose that we can also exchange technologies and information of what we're using. So maybe you can send us some information and technical details of what you are using, and we can try to find ways of adapting it to these other areas. Yeah, I agree with you. Perhaps, Harold, if you're there, go on. Go ahead. Yes, I'm here. Good morning, everyone. I was listening very attentively to the presentations, and I moved more towards the side of Gonzalo. Well, Joaquin already said that I have a lot of doubts with regards to the dry latrines or ecological latrines. And I've never seen ecological latrines that have worked, except what I've seen in Bolivia with the Melanites, but with the indigenous populations, never. So that is why I would like to know. And also, Osvaldo, I know about those twin latrines, as you've called them, the type that you have presented. I didn't know that there were others. I have always thought that those were the ones. But what I would like to know is, in how many families or in how many communities have the dry latrines worked? And for how long did you have to do some training or awareness raising with the people? Because for the dry latrine, my experience is that if we want to accomplish something, we have to be there for years doing all the follow-up and everything for it to work well. So I would like to hear a comment from Osvaldo about this. Yes, no doubt, Harold. No doubt that this is something that cannot be accomplished overnight, right? Those are processes that take time. I am going to ask Elsa to elaborate a little bit on this topic about the trainings, the time that has been applied, like, the dry solar latrin, and what the acceptance process has been. Initially, the training that has been done by some of the leaders. So, Elsa, if you're still there, please. Yes, I'm still here. Okay, I would first say that those are very good observations. And Harold, I have to tell you that I'm a mosquito, and in my house, I do use that compost solar latrine. It's worked very well for me. Obviously, perhaps I've had a little bit more access to information, to awareness raising, and I am convinced about the use of this latrine in places where there is no basic sanitation service. And in Puerto Lempira, that is, let's say, more developed or has a greater growth at La Mosquitia, we still do not have a service of this type, like basic sanitation, as I've just said. So each family builds the septic well, or they use these latrines. Here at MOPAWI, we also have the more modern latrine with the use of the septic tank, but we also have the compost latrines, and it has worked very well. What I like about this latrine is that, and that also depends on the use, there's no smell. I do not want to elaborate here about the use of the latrines, but every time the latrine is used, and you power a cup of material, it may be dirt, it may be uh, sawdust, ashes, or organic matter. And this also helps in the decomposition process. It has not been easy, Harold, really. It has not been easy. I say that we cannot define what is the time required for people to understand or for people to accept this technology. I can mention, based on my own knowledge, that there was a family that we invited to use this latrine, and they used the latrine, but sometime after taking the material out, they had their reserve, and they said, okay, we're not going to use this material. This is excretes. But when they opened the door, their surprise was that there was no smell and there was no excrete. It was organic matter to be used. Not directly like as the single resource, but then you have this component after mixing it with dirt or other ingredients to be able to have more integral organic matter with more benefits. We What we did was to first talk to the communities, to introduce the type of latrines that we had been able to identify. Also, learning about previous experiences, there have been many types of latrines that have been brought in, both projects promoted by the Secretariat of Health as well as by other cooperation entities at La Mosquitia, and they had all failed. Even ourselves in the past, as MOPAWI, We were not lucky with the identification of a latrine model. Precisely because of that, precisely because of odors and the fact that it was not seen as environmentally adequate. And we have had, I can say, based on my experience, we have had now a lot of acceptance for this. It may also be that it works because with the community we were able to select the site, the place where the latrines were established. Because probably if we would have chosen like a particular person, maybe the latrine wouldn't have worked. But we established them in health centers, in schools, in churches, or in the house of a leader that is visited by the community. So that also helped. It is a factor that helped in the acceptance of the latrines. At this level, I cannot say that the latrines were individually accepted by the family, but they have been accepted by the communities because of where the latrines were located. And the time to socialize this, to share this, and to raise awareness. We got together with the communities. We explained to them the design selected, also with the help of the communities themselves, and we explained the use of the latrines, the experience of some communities that we have visited. I think that a couple of them have rejected the technology, and we have respected that. But the majority of them, not just at the basing of La Tasca, but also in the communities of the Rio Plátano biosphere, where we established 15 latrines. Also, in other communities of the basin, we established 28 communities. So, that's few communities. We can say that maybe a little bit over 40 communities in total. But in all cases, there's been evidence of the acceptance of this technology. Perhaps also it was because of our constant coaching, I would say. And these latrines are installed in, let's say, 15, 20 days. And then the communities are supported with some regulations for use. Sorry, there is a plane going by. And also, our constant coaching is really helpful. Perhaps not as a project as such, but going there, visiting them, and asking them what their experience has been very useful. So that would be my contribution in this. Well, that is very interesting. Thank you very much, Helser. And perhaps, and Harold is also saying thank you. Well, definitely, Harold. Just as an announcement, we're going to have to make a session with MOPAWI in a given moment between us. But well, first of all, I would like to thank Gonzalo and Osvaldo and Elser that they have gotten connected and shared the experience in sanitation technologies and indigenous communities. Really, the Crew Plus project appreciates that. And for all the participants, we would really appreciate if you have some minutes to fill out the evaluation form for the course. Susan has just put it up in the chat. And in any case, we'll also send you an email once we put up the videos and the presentations. Susanna has just put it again in the chat. I would also like to share with you very quickly in my screen, once again, as we've done at the very beginning, we have the website. You can check the courses that are coming soon in available courses, and also right here in the section of the resources, you will see, for example, these technologies here. We're going to be putting them up in the coming days, and as soon as this is ready, we're going to send you an email. And I know sometimes it is difficult to use that in these formats, but I would like to ask you, we have been trying other mechanisms to communicate about the sessions, and we have sent a kind of newsletter, which is this one that I'm showing here, where We sent you some minutes before the session with the links of the call. So I would like to know if this kind of newsletters are coming to you. I don't know, somebody that has been connected, somebody that may be in the call, maybe you can tell me, yes, I got it, or no, I didn't, just for me to have an idea so that I can kind of get a feeling about it. Or you can raise your hand. You can use the like or raise your hand if you received it. It's just for me, for us to know. I mean, we cannot monitor who opens the newsletter and who doesn't, but we just want to know if it's really getting to you. We're trying to find out what is the best mechanism to communicate this type of information. I got it. I got it, Joaquin. Okay. Thank you, Osvaldo. I also got it. Thank you, Elvira. All right. So I would say that in any case, when you fill out the form, that it wouldn't take you more than a couple of minutes. It's just a few questions for you to help us improve the courses. So maybe you can write something about this in the comments and we will really appreciate it. So just as a final announcement, next week we have the course of constructed wetlands. Some places they call it biofilters or bioorchards on water treatment. That's going to be on April 14th, and that is next Wednesday, 9 o'clock Costa Rica time. So if you're interested on this, just sign up so that we can send you the links for the webinar. And without further ado, I just want to thank you all very much. I wish you a great day. And I want to once again thank Osvaldo, Ilse, and Gonzalo for their participation. And I hope you're all doing great. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.